welcome to another episode of the Pursuing Greatness podcast, the place experts share their wisdom on living well by mastering health, wealth, relationships, and spirit. Before we get started, I want to let you know that the best way to support the show is just to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends and family. Also, if you'd like to learn more about how to master life, check out our website at pursuinggreatnesspodcast.com. With that said, I hope you enjoy the episode. We have a very special guest with us today, so grab your pen and paper and enjoy the journey. All right, we are live with another episode of the Pursuing Greatness podcast. Today we have with us my friend, Anthony Papini. Anthony is the Inclusion and Diversity Director for JAMF, the standard in Apple Enterprise Management. They help 40,000 businesses, schools, and healthcare organizations succeed with Apple. Anthony is also a certified executive leadership coach specializing in strengths-based equity and inclusion-focused coaching. That is a mouthful. Anthony, thank you very much for hopping on the show today. How are you?
I'm well, Gabe. It's so good to see you. I'm thrilled to be here. Appreciate you extending the invitation. It's good to sit down and catch up with you. We've known each other for quite a while, and so this feels very exciting to get to participate.
Absolutely. For those who are not aware, Anthony is the first person that I've been friends with for a very long time. We've known each other for about 15 years, so this should be good. We had to calculate that before the episode started. But Anthony, I know your story. People listening and watching do not. So take us back to the beginning. How did you get started on the path that you're on now, and where is it pointing to?
Oh, wow. Yeah, my story begins even before me. I feel like it's important to kind of set up how I got to where I got and gives a framework to think about how I think. My parents immigrated to this country. So I grew up first generation American, first person in my family to go to university. And, growing up, I was so grateful for that opportunity because it was really clear to me, my parents and my grandparents who came to this country, they grew up in rural Italy, didn't have the educational opportunities. And so for them, nothing meant more than to see my brother and I succeed and get an education. And so education's always been so pivotal, so core to my identity and my work. In growing up in the Pacific Northwest to this family and trying to really assess and understand myself at a point when I went to college and had this expanded experience. We're meeting people for the first time and had to start to really think about aspects of my identity. And so, as I mentioned, being first generation American, being first generation student, it also was the first time I became conscious that I was white and what that meant, that I was male and what that meant, that I was cisgender, biologically born male, what that meant. But then also these other aspects of my identity that I hadn't also equally thought about. I had a congenital hip issue. And so I walk with a limp and have a disability. I came out as gay in college. And so it's just this reconciliation of all these aspects of my identity and starting to really think critically about what that means, set the landscape for how I grew up, how I proceeded in what I wanted to do with my life. I got to college thinking I wanted to be a network engineer and quickly realized that wasn't the right path for me. I had all these questions about people. And it was really important for me to think about how people fit together, how people work together, how we create belonging, and what we do to sort of show up for each other. And so I decided to study education administration. I knew I didn't want to teach, but I wanted to work in education. And so I studied social justice theories, I studied educational theories, I studied racial justice theories, and was really intrigued with how all those pieces either created a sense of belonging for people and started to realize actually there were more instances where these systems created exclusion for large groups of folks, for Black people and people of color more broadly, for women, for LGBTQ people, for people with disabilities, for non-binary individuals and transgender individuals, for non-native English speakers, etc. And that to me was a pivotal moment in how I proceeded again into my career, a little bit by accident. I went on to grad school and studied student affairs, worked in a university for a long time. That's how I came to know you. You were a University of Washington graduate. Go Huskies.
So many years ago.
So many years ago. Hey, don't say that. That's going to make me feel old. And working in student leadership programs, working in multicultural affairs, really thinking about what the student experience was. And I was thrilled to be able to do that. And so working in higher education was so meaningful to me. And in the midst of volunteering, I had this day job, but I wanted to volunteer. There were all these meaningful nonprofit organizations. And so I started volunteering with one of the largest LGBTQ community foundations in the country, Pride Foundation. And in the midst of volunteering for them, that ultimately led to a job and kind of a parallel career trajectory. Still education focused, still about creating this culture of belonging, but in a nonprofit setting.
So it started out as a network engineer, and now you're in a nonprofit, correct?
Who would have thought? And from education to nonprofit, back into higher education, back into nonprofit, and then suddenly I end up in tech. I'm working at a large global corporation, working on an education pipeline program, helping them think about how do people belong? How do we grow our network of folks who don't look like us? How do we think critically about including more women and more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color into the program? How do we get participants from rural parts of the country to be engaged? And doing that work, again, the heart of it for me was, what is meaningful in understanding people's experiences and what helps them belong? And in doing that for many years, and then working in diversity programs at this company, I quickly realized that I had this passion around people. So I sought to get my coaching certification. I did that and decided to hang my shingle, as they say, and go out there and do executive coaching and help these startup founders and CEOs of organizations that were growing think critically about how they create a culture of belonging, how they show up as strength-based leaders, how they engage a community to grow with a really clear vision. And I was thrilled to do that. In the midst of all this, for some context setting of dating where we are at this point, this was at the peak then of the start of COVID-19 hitting the United States. It was a reconciliation moment for a lot of white folks, first time realizing the impacts of racism and racial injustice in systems like the police across this country, with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And so doing this work, again, felt deeply personal and made me reflect on what are aspects of my identity that I need to think critically of and assess how I'm using my voice. And that's what prompted me ultimately to return into a corporate setting, doing specifically inclusion and diversity work, is being that ally, being that advocate, using my sense of identity and the privileges I have being a white cis male, to speak up and speak out and advocate and help create policy and practices and be a role model in that sense in a company that was truly investing, and I hope others are observing, a commitment to diversity and inclusion. So that's my journey, and I'll say I'm still going through it. It's a lot of twists and turns. As you said, going from wanting to be a network engineer to doing D&I work,
Yep.
big divide there, but so
Absolutely.
meaningful.
Yeah. People's, I mean, I don't think anybody on this podcast that has come on has had a linear story. It's always winding. It's always twisting and turning. So it sounds like yours is not an exception in that manner.
No, and I've appreciated that. I mean, as I've listened to others who have guest participated on this podcast, I think that's telling. And then there's some universality of that. And, if I could share kind of any bit of insight, it's be open to those moments. You absolutely want to have a plan. You need to be thinking a few steps ahead. But then there are going to be these instances where something unexpected is going to present itself, or you're going to be focused on something and a meaningful experience will happen. And I encourage people to really assess that and take stock of, why did I notice that? What impact did it have? What impact could it have on others? And determine, is this a viable path for me to consider, or do I stay on course? And there's no easy answer for that. But I think if you sort of have tunnel vision and shut yourself off and get so fixated on, I have to do A, then B, then C, you miss out on the journey. And I think you set yourself up ultimately for some really missed experiences and disappointment.
Yep, absolutely. And so, I mean, a lot of what you do, what you do in the past, and then what you plan to do in the future through your coaching program, is centered around identity and around inclusion. And I mean, I myself, when I used to work in corporate, I've been on teams that did not kind of espouse those values. And so what kind of advice would you give to, say, middle management, corporate, who is, leading a team and is responsible for creating a culture that is accepting of all different faiths, beliefs, sexual orientations, whatever it may be? How would you go about leading them? How would you go about leading somebody or coaching somebody who is who's in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, in those instances, it's take stock of your identities, be aware of yourself, think about critically your own network. Pull up your LinkedIn, look at who you're connected with, pull up your other social media and look at who you're friends with. Does everyone look like you, more or less? And I mean this seriously. I've coached clients who have said, well, I mean, no, I mean, people look, I have blonde-haired friends, I have brown-haired friends, I have friends who wear glasses. And I said, stop, you're making excuses. Really think critically about your identities. Does everyone look like you? Is everyone kind of in your same social circle, same education level, same background, same experiences? Or can you really point to critical representation of diversity? And I mean diversity broadly: race, gender identity, sexual orientation, education status and background, national origin, I mean, all religion, where people grew up, family status and structure. I could go on and on. Folks might get fixated. And again, this is around that opening yourself up to a little broader path of thinking. Do that as a critical assessment. And if the answer is, wow, yeah, I'm looking at mirror after mirror after mirror, think about how you resolve that, how you address that. What are the networks you need to build? What are the relationships you've been ignoring? What are those paths you're not going down?
So, I mean, so you specifically have worked a lot with startup companies. Does it generally, is your work, especially when it's around leadership and inclusion, and identity and things of that nature, is it generally surrounding hiring? Because that's when I think of creating a diverse culture, it all stems from who you bring into the company, not from the activities that you do once you've already established the the people that are part of the company? Is it all for hiring, or is it also just how they present themselves in front of people?
I mean, that's a great question, Gabe. I think that's a part of it. You know, who you hire is key. When you broaden your network and you bring other people in, when your referrals look more diverse, great. But what is keeping those diverse individuals, the collective, talent that you bring in at your company? And that's sort of the second piece of this. For companies largely white, largely male, largely from a similar background, you could, tomorrow go out and hire 100 Black folks, 100 women, 100 trans or gender non-binary individuals, and bring them on. But if your culture isn't one of inclusion, if you aren't thinking critically about how do I build this sense of belonging, do my colleagues and the folks who work here feel safe, physically safe, psychologically safe? What's going to keep them from leaving? Why are they going to stay? And, to that end, that's the other piece of this work. Are you assessing critically your culture? Are leaders doing their part to build a structure that not only recruits, but retains a diverse body of employees? Do you have clear paths for professional development for women of color in your organization? Do you have clearly demonstrated benefits that serve and support working families, particularly working moms, trans employees, employees with disabilities? Or is it, a hurdle, a struggle to get access to these resources just to be able to do their job and belong at your company? If it's the latter, then you're not creating a culture of inclusion, and you can, do all the hiring of underrepresented populations that you want, but it's not going to change the tone, the sentiment, and the sense of belonging at your company one bit. So I think it's a both and, to your point.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. And man, it's one of these moments when I had a question that I was going to ask and it completely slipped my mind, but that's okay. That's why we keep rolling on. So I'm going to push us into the quick question round. This is where I'm going to ask you quick questions and you give me quick responses. And it always starts out with books. You have listened to my podcast before, so you know what's coming up. So Anthony, 2 books, one book about just general life wisdom, and then one book about whatever the topic that you're talking about is, which is leadership and identity. Inclusion, sorry.
Yeah, so the 2 books that come to mind, I think every person out there, especially white folks, need to read Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. It will challenge your notions. There will be a lot of folks who struggle, but read it. The other one is Samantha Irby's Wow, No Thank You. She's hilarious, and she sort of writes about this experience about writing and about just existing in these humorous moments that happen to her in a way that, again, thematic for 2020, was still meaningful and heartfelt about identity, but delivered with such humor. So it's an excellent read if you want something that is meaningful, but on the lighter end.
All right, that's Wow, No Thank You. Who's the author there?
Samantha Irby, IRBY.
Samantha Irby. Wow, No Thank You from Samantha Irby, and then How to Be an Anti-Racist. I didn't catch the author for that one either.
Dr. Ibram Kendi.
Ibram Kendi. All right. This is the first time I can say I haven't read either of those, so I will have to pick one.
Go read both of them, Gabe. It's your homework. All these years later, you homework.
Going on to the next question. This is for your younger self. So the Anthony who was still considering network engineering, he was looking at those networking books. If you could go back to that Anthony, sit down with him, look him in the eye, ask or give him one piece of advice moving forward into his life.
Oh man, there's so much. And it's funny, I've even reflected on this question, and now I find myself immediately going to a place of like, be comfortable in your own skin. Live and don't stress about weird, wonky little details. Be yourself. There was just a period of time where I stressed about, how I was showing up, how I spoke, like what my voice sounded like, what clothes I was wearing, how I would not want to walk across a room or in a space because of how I physically walked with this like lurch, and just would stress about those things. And now I look back, 20 some odd years later, that's frightening to say. But yeah, it's like you beat yourself up in your head. Don't do it. You have so much to offer. Just be yourself. And I share that with my younger self, and I share that with other younger folks, to just be your authentic you and embrace and love it.
Yep. Yeah, that is probably the best piece of advice you could give your younger self. I'm agreeing with you. It's also when you're, that is the piece of advice that you really get while you're living. It's like it's difficult to be yourself unless you've really gone through the shit. So great piece of advice.
True.
I like it. Next one is about habits. Habits are the foundation of our life. So if you could point to one habit that you feel has contributed the most to your well-being and success today, what would that be?
Oh, hands down, getting up around 5:15 every morning, including
5:15. Woo.
Including weekdays, or weekends, excuse me, weekends and weekdays, and get the day started. This did not start out of a positive thing. I was having this weird, like, sudden onset bout of insomnia, and I was waking up at odd times, and I was trying to fall back asleep. And finally, I'd read something that said, when you wake up, get out of bed. Do what, like, get out of bed and start, because you're training your body effectively to sleep in later by doing that. Your body will then be like, oh, I think I need more rest. Clearly, my body didn't get that message. But I actually feel more energized. And so I wake up now 5:15 almost every day. And I get up, I make myself my latte, I read the news. I purposely don't check email or social media or that kind of thing. I read the news, quick high level of what's going on, and then kind of have some time to reflect. Then I do spend a little bit of time in the morning. I check in on emails and Slack channels, make sure there's nothing, burning to respond to. Then I go to the gym. I bike to the gym, exercise. I come back, get ready, and start my day. And by this point, it's a little after 8:30, I guess, in the morning, and I feel so energized for the day, and so much more focused. So that works for me. I know that's not for everybody.
Yep.
But for me, that's been a habit that is just cemented, keeping me focused on the day.
I am 100% with you. I'm all about the early morning rising, but I get up at 5:30, and I feel like that extra half hour is just, that's hard. The next question is mentors. It's funny because when Anthony and I first met, we met in the leadership development program at UW, which was basically a mentorship program. So this is, you gotta knock this one home, basically, is what I'm saying. So this is about mentors. If you could, you don't have to say the person's name, but if you could point to one person in your life that you feel has really contributed to your journey and contributed to your growth, you don't have to say their name, but say kind of what did they do and how did they support you on your journey?
Oh, I want to say their name, and can I pick two?
Go for it.
So I preface these two names with, there have been so many people. I've been so fortunate to have amazing mentors across my life. From when I was a child, in college, into today, and mentors of all ages. But two people, and I'm sharing this because these folks, are Renee Singleton and Lincoln Johnson, both at University of Washington, both working in student affairs and student activities. And they both, in so many ways, I think, took a chance on me, bringing me to UW. there's so much I want to say. They truly to this day still inspire me, motivate me, cheerlead me. And that I'm so grateful for that. I learned so much. I'm in my 20s working at UW, was so stubborn and maybe even a little bit arrogant. And they helped steer me into a place of showing up with far more grace and thinking critically about how I can land impact, but doing so in a way that celebrated my talents. And if I could emulate just one aspect, that particular skill that they both have, man, I would be so fortunate. But those two are legendary in my books. And I know there are so many people out there in the field of higher education, so many students who look up to those two. So I want to acknowledge their name because they are remarkable people.
I love it. And yes, I've met both, and they're both great people. And it is amazing how much of an impact mentors like that can have in your life. So that is great. And the last question, we're going into the last one, and this one is for the guests because you've given us a lot of great pieces of advice, a lot of great pieces of wisdom. I'm sure people out there want to reach out, say hi. What is the best way for them to do that?
I can be reached on Twitter at Anthony Papini, AnthonyPapini, or anthonypapini.com. Both are easy ways to get in touch with me. And Gabe, I have to say, I mean, time flew. This was such a joy, and I'm so appreciative again that you invited me on. I love getting to see your face. I'm happy that I got to participate in this. What a joy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you hopping on here. And if anybody listening and watching wants to get in contact with Anthony, you can go anthonypapini.com. I'll put that URL in the show notes. So just click a little more in the description. It'll pop down the full description, and in there you'll find the URL. And yes, Anthony, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you here on the show after 15 years of friendship. So Anthony, thanks for hopping on here. For everybody who's here with us today, thank you guys for showing up. You are the reason we do this. So we appreciate having you here. Again, the best way to support the show is just to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends and family. Other than that, I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful day. Keep pursuing greatness, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you guys for sticking with us on another episode of the Pursuing Greatness podcast. I hope you got a lot of value out of that guest. Again, the best way to support the show is just to subscribe, like, and share with your friends and family. Also, check out pursuinggreatnesspodcast.com if you want to get more information about what we do and what we offer. I hope you guys have a great day and keep living in integrity with yourselves. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode coming shortly.